we're calling Noble Dollar a composable yield stablecoin. It's a yield-bearing stablecoin, which we're seeing has a lot of demand in general. But there's this other element, which is it's fundamentally programmable. You can fundamentally decide where to redirect the yield kind of on chain in this programmatic, transparent way. We've seen the ebbs and flows, right? We've seen IBC, take off, kind of dominate bridging volume. And then we've seen that retract, right? But at the end of the day, there is this whole other world that hasn't experienced the call it beauty and simplicity of IBC, which is the EVM space. Can Noble sort of serve as this stablecoin and RWA issuance chain for these kind of emerging kind of EVM app chains and roll-up environments?
All right, let's go. I'm here with Jelena Djuric, the CEO and co-founder of Noble. Noble is infrastructure for stablecoins, particularly in the Cosmos ecosystem. And we've known each other for a while. In fact, Interop Ventures is an investor in Noble. And today we're going to get a bit of an update because it's been a while since you've been on the podcast, been a while since we talked. What's been happening in the Noble world over the last, I guess, 6 months or a year. The Noble Dollar, this new project that you guys are spearheading. And also we're going to talk about Cosmos a little bit because it's been a while since we went deep into the Cosmos trenches. So yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Seb. I think the last time I was on was definitely more than a year ago. So a lot has changed, a lot has happened. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so I guess how are things going? You guys are now growing and scaling, and how's that as as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, how does it feel to be kind of scaling at the speed you guys have been scaling?
Yeah, it's been really just a pleasure, honestly, to be able to have the resources to onboard, just fantastic people across engineering, marketing, product. So the life of a founder, I'm not going to talk, grovel around this too much, but it's actually pretty hard, right? I feel like there used to be a little bit of fetishization of being a founder and how cool it was. And I'm no, it's actually really difficult. And I'm sure you also feel that with the fund and a lot of the stuff that you do. But the biggest benefit and advantage of being a founder is getting to just work with amazing people. I know that's maybe sometimes a cliche, but yeah, and we've been fortunate enough to grow the team. So kind of on that front, yeah, probably since we last spoke, we hit a number of really important milestones in our kind of life cycle. So of course we raised our Series A, which you guys participated in, and then that was led by Paradigm with participation from a number of other funds, and that was a $15 million raise, and that's given us the kind of resources and really mandate to really expand on what I call the 1.0 version of the Noble mission and kind of vision, which I'm happy to obviously go into more details around and how that's evolved. But yeah, it's been great. Ultimately, it's been great. And really it's the people can make the journey really gratifying.
How big is the team now?
Yeah, so it's 13 of us. Most of that is, of course, engineering. And we're hiring. So do check out our careers page at noble.xyz/careers. We're looking for a head of design role, and then we'll be building out the engineering function as well. So always really on the lookout for really talented Golang engineers, Cosmos SDK engineers, and also actually on the EVM side, which I'm happy to discuss why we're looking for that kind of talent in a moment. But yeah, check out our careers page.
And you brought on a CTO, so you which is I think something you guys wanted for a long time, John, formerly from Kive.
Yeah.
What's that been like?
Yeah, so John's actually officially a co-founder as well. So when I started the project, it was really kind of a labor of love among a number of kind of teams. So for those that remember, originally Noble was being sort of co-developed by a number of teams, including Strangelove Ventures. And then, of course, myself as the founder, I brought on a co-founder. His name is Stefan. And that was great. That was sort of the initial MVP product. But really after our seed round, we decided, okay, let's build a team. Let's bring on that CTO kind of leader. And that was, of course, eventually ended up being John. And so Yeah, he's doing a great job. Again, like I just get such great feedback from both like our engineering team, but within the ecosystem, he is definitely, one of the brightest minds kind of in this Cosmos engineering space. So anyways, yeah, he's great and officially a co-founder. So it's three of us now. Myself, Stefan, and John.
Awesome. So I don't know. I don't know where to start off with first. I guess maybe just how phenomenal the USDC growth has been on Noble. There's a meme in the Cosmos space. I can't remember like who's tweeting this, but like I think it's Polkachu. Maybe it's not Polkachu, but like he tweets like every time there's like a new milestone, he'll just like tweet the USDC.cool screenshot and over the last year, I've just watched that rank, go up from like
Yeah.
Avalanche, and you're just like, and then now Polygon,
Yeah.
you've surpassed Polygon. And actually, I use that a lot. Like when talking to investors and talking about the teams we invested in, I talk about Movement and Noble, and sort of pitch it as the fourth or I guess fifth today, the largest USDC issuer in crypto. What do you think that growth is attributed to, and like who's using Noble and who's bringing liquidity onto Noble, and where do you see the biggest applications and use cases for USDC in the Cosmos IBC ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I'll just know, kind of like the growth that we've seen around USDC adoption within Cosmos as a whole, vis-a-vis, of course, kind of the Noble's, the Noble chain was not inevitable, right? Like we do actually have native Tether in the ecosystem that's on Kava, and that really hasn't seen much traction. And so I'll kind of answer the first part of your question, which is the reason really for a lot of this adoption is a couple of things. One, it's really how we designed the Noble protocol, like from day one, right? We wanted to make sure it was this highly minimalistic, kind of flexible, chain. We're not, introducing DeFi natively on the Noble layer one, right? We have a proof of authority validator set, super fast upgrades. The kind of module framework that we've adopted for native issuance is very specific to our goal, which is how do you proliferate native stablecoins everywhere. And so when we obviously kind of came up with that initial like design, it was still a thesis, still still something that we didn't see kind of being validated in the real world and in the real market. And then you fast forward to today, and it's clear that model has worked. And so what are kind of elements of that model? Well, of course, there's a few things. One, we have things like Circle's native bridge, the cross-chain transfer protocol integrated directly onto Noble. So this means that today you can go natively between any Cosmos chain and any CCTP chain, which includes Ethereum, Solana, Arbitrum, etc., natively in one click. Under the hood, that also includes IBC and specifically IBC forwarding. So I think you were mentioning you were looking to, well, I think it was Euro E actually that you were looking to get access to in Cosmos. But if it's USDC, for example, that's like a one-click transfer, right? Like take your USDC from ETH to Noble or Osmosis in one click. And that's something we developed under the hood just to really make it easy, again, for people to port their stables kind of from point A to point B with one click, no slippage, all of these kind of basic, I would say, UX requirements. And really because of that, and of course, because of a lot of the kind of community work that we did, you really saw USD take off. So yeah, I mean, that number, right, like that, call it 500 million or so of native USDC on Noble, of course, is demand driven from protocols within Cosmos that of course, rely on stablecoins for a variety of use cases. So about 70%, I would say, is around USDC. Of that 500 million is on DYDX. The rest of that is Osmosis, say, Injective, and a number of other protocols. So that kind of ratio is actually also like similar in other ecosystems. So like if you look at Arbitrum, most of that stablecoin liquidity is like hyper liquid. Of course, that means Solana is a different beast, right? With like all of their kind of meme coin use cases. But if you look at DeFi and like trading, it's typically, a handful of kind of DEXs or DeFi platforms that, drive a lot of that liquidity and volume. But of course, Noble's role is to service that long tail of app chains and rollups as well, right? Like if you're a developer, maybe with less resources or, less connections, you should still be able to tap into that like native stablecoin liquidity. And so I'm very like proud and excited when we have these, startup kind of earlier teams saying, hey, like we really need like a, seamless access to stables. Like how does Noble work? And then we can kind of educate them on like Noble, but also IBC, and then of course our implementation of CCTP and things like this. So yeah, we're again about $500 million. Yes, fifth largest protocol with native USDC, and yeah, but 70% of that is DYDX approximately. But yeah, I mean it's growing, right? Like that demand and that kind of distribution ultimately will evolve and grow, and we're just here to service that demand.
Yeah, so a pretty large portion then, I kind of knew this was the case, is attributable to DYDX. Where do you see the biggest growth opportunities, and do you think that like DYDX owning such a large chunk of like being such a large part of your user base maybe presents a threat? Like, say like DYDX launches its own stablecoin to serve its users, so that would potentially like take away a lot of usage from Noble. How do you think about diversifying, the use cases and like applications that are heavily leveraging Noble in order to be more resilient in that sort of event?
Yeah. So there's a few things there. And like kind of to your first question, which is kind of what is like future demand look like. So obviously like being Cosmos people and like being around for like a decent amount of time at this point, we've seen the ebbs and flows, right? We've seen like IBC, take off, kind of dominate bridging volume. And then we've seen that retract, right? But at the end of the day, there is this like whole other world that like hasn't experienced the call it beauty and simplicity of IBC, which is the EVM space. And so one really exciting development we're looking towards is IBC Eureka. So this is the kind of new, this will be a main release of IBC, which extends IBC to the EVM space. So you're actually going to have an opportunity for, various EVM app chains and kind of roll-up environments to leverage IBC as the bridging mechanism for various, kind of assets and for interoperability. And we're looking at this point, and we're having a lot of conversations around this. Can Noble sort of serve as this stablecoin and RWA issuance chain for these kind of emerging kind of EVM app chains and roll-up environments? And you might question like why, right? Well, why don't these kind of projects source from ETH mainnet, or why don't these projects source from like other layer twos? And it all comes back to UX. So, I mean, again, we do a lot of things to make it really easy to use Noble, right? Like these like kind of under the hood workflows around, forwarding. Again, we have the native kind of CCTP integration already. We have, fast finality, 1 second block times. USDC is used as a native gas token. All of these sort of like kind of UX arguments, I think really resonate with developers. And so yeah, we're continuing to have a lot of conversations with various builders. And by the way, this isn't necessarily just for USDC, right? Like there are many kind of like stable coins out there, and many of which we support. And so we sort of say, hey, like these are kind of the native integrations that we have. This is kind of the mechanism for how you would sort of like in one click have this kind of ability to source stablecoin and RWA liquidity from Noble. And so we're kind of doing a lot of the research and the kind of market research around the demand for this. And so the kind of high level answer to your question is we definitely see the EVM space as a source of demand for a lot of like the liquidity and the stablecoin liquidity that we generate and proliferate. And it's funny, like on the kind of like a side note, a lot of the issues that we're seeing in Ethereum space, Cosmos faced like years ago, right? Fragmentation, right, is like a huge problem. This kind of like debate, right? Our L2 is like parasitic to like the ETH mainnet. We've had these debates from forever ago in Cosmos ecosystem. And so, yeah, I mean, as you know, like we solved for this stablecoin kind of liquidity fragmentation in Cosmos with USDC, of course, and the other assets that we support. And now we're thinking, hey, like, is this something that we could potentially do for EVM projects as well? Once, of course,
Interesting.
IBC is stable and performant. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this IBC Eureka, and I think just there's a bigger topic here, which is the fragmentation of IBC and the different IBC versions that are emerging. Now, I'm not like super deep in the weeds on this, but there's IBC Eureka. There is like Unions IBC, there's Hyperledger's IBC. And as far as I understand it, these are not compatible now. Like this is what IBC was meant to solve.
Yeah.
And now we find ourselves potentially with 3 competing versions of the same protocol. Can you give us like sort of the high level of why this is happening and what are the different forces at play here?
Definitely. It's funny. It's like that meme, right, around like standards. I think it's a no. I think it's like a comic, but it goes something like, there's like 20 standards. You should use my standard, right? It's like, well, introducing like a 21st standard isn't like solving for like the lack of coordination among like the standards that already exist, right? So yes, there are kind of multiple, call it kind of companies and groups that are kind of building, on top of IBC that are obviously trying to make things like IBC to EVM like go to market like quicker. Yeah, so I mean, you kind of named a few of those projects. I think like Hyperlane, of course. Yeah, there's Union. There's of course IBC, kind of call it Core, which is being developed by the Interchain Labs team. Ultimately, these are just different teams looking to take IBC go to market quicker and looking to kind of build these relationships with these various protocols. I'm not going to like go into like the nuances or details necessarily of like what makes like Union's implementation different than kind of like hyperlanes. But I think for Noble, what we care about, and that's the thing obviously that I want to focus on, is obviously what is like the easiest to implement, right? Like what is actually stable, what has been audited, what has the least amount of hops involved when it comes to transferring tokens from like point A to point B, and what has like the greatest like developer tooling around things like IBC to EVM. That's what we care about. And yeah, ultimately the way that we design Noble, of course, like out of the box, is to work with like IBC Core as we know it, which is developed and maintained among a number of teams, but at the same time, we're also highly flexible to support other interop solutions. So we obviously do talk to even like the kind of standard kind of bridging protocols, right? I mean, one team that we're working with is Wormhole, actually for Noble's implementation of which is a new stablecoin that we're supporting, which is going to be wrapped on Noble and called Noble Dollar, which I'm super excited to chat about in a bit. But yeah, Wormhole is actually like the bridging solution in that scenario, right? Because like IBC Eureka is just not stable and it just doesn't make sense for this particular use case. And so yeah, Noble is highly leveraged and exposed to like all interop solutions versus like kind of pigeonholing ourselves into one. Of course, IBC is like the preferred, and we like kind of spent a number of resources and dedicated time and energy to making IBC work on some of the workflows that I described earlier. But again, we're also like exposed to other kind of interop solutions as well. And I think at the end of the day, we just care about the end user. We care about the use case. That's why, we're okay to work with, various interop providers.
And so you mentioned that Noble would issue USDC on EVM chains. This sort of comes as a surprise. I wonder maybe if you could dive into this a little bit more, because there is like native USDC over in the EVM space, and it feels like bridging is just like much easier there. It feels intuitively like a much further hop, right, to have USDC be issued on Noble. Are these chains that are looking for real native issuance of USDC, and they're looking for like the closest thing that they can get to that in the form of a like bridged Noble asset, or is the idea for Noble to issue those directly? And like, what's the deal there, like kind of with Circle in your ability to say like, okay, hey, L2 whatever, we're going to be the native USDC issuer there so that people can bridge straight out, into CCTP and across that Circle ecosystem?
Yeah. So there's like a few kind of dynamics here at play. So first of all, for like any kind of, again, app chain roll up, there is already something called a bridge contract standard that Circle offers, which is almost like a permissionless kind of standard where, a project can simply say, hey, we're going to first support like a bridged standard of USDC that like Circle has sort of, call it blessed and said, yeah, this is the bridge standard that we support. And then with enough volume, of course, that could be kind of migrated to native. But even like within that, right, like think about the developer ecosystem. There is like hundreds, if not thousands, of projects looking to deploy, whether that's an L2 or an L3, or kind of leverage a new sort of roll up as a service framework, like conduits framework, other examples. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of demand for this for both the native the native asset and also this kind of bridge contract standard. And so Noble simply kind of plays this role. And again, this is something that we're working towards, which is, in the meantime, before, let's say, this native asset is like, kind of deployed, via Circle and kind of their internal engineering kind of processes, is there a role for Noble to play? And increasingly the answer is like, yes, right? So one team that we have chatted about this with in depth is the Conduit, kind of project. And so they have this really, kind of powerful new kind of roll up as a service kind of environment to just like, again, help developers, spin up roll-ups, go to market quicker. And of course, stablecoins are always part of that like equation. And so again, we're evaluating like, can Noble service this kind of function where, again, it's like this one click, feels like native kind of experience where you do get the native stable, onto that roll up, kind of in a seamless way. And again, the only reason we're really even like talking about this is because we've done this in Cosmos, right? Where arguably Cosmos is, just as fractured or fragmented than what you have in the Ethereum space, where again, you have all these like in our case, it's like layer ones, they're sovereign layer ones with their own validator set. Of course, the interop mechanism is standardized, it's IBC. But again, you have the same sort of dynamics at play where these projects do want, of course, these native stablecoins that they can, securely advertise as such, right? There are redemption mechanisms, with centralized exchanges. It works pretty well. And so, yes, of course, there are native stables on Ethereum, both mainnet and on various layer twos, whether that's, Arbitrum or Optimism or, other environments. But at the same time, we're still seeing that doesn't solve these kind of needs of these like long tail, pool of developers that want, some developer kind of environment and experience that, again, it feels like native. For all intents and purposes, it is native. It's one hop from the origin. But of course, it's, a different kind of issuance model than what you see maybe vis-a-vis things like the superchain or via things like the Arbitrum bridge or things like this.
Yeah, right. And so Arbitrum does have USDC, right? It does have native. And the superchain also, Optimism. Yeah, of course. Okay, cool. And something I wanted to also talk about, we'll talk about like the USDN and M0 and all of that in a second. But one of the, I think, interesting things about Noble is that it's a proof of authority chain. And I know there's been discussion or at least rumors or just lots of conversation about like Noble's or like where Noble would align, right?
Mm-hmm.
Early on, there was like this idea of that Noble would be a interchain security or replicated security channel in the Cosmos Hub. There was also, I think, some discussion at some point about being like an eigenlayer AVS, maybe, although I don't remember I don't know if I remember that super accurately, but what's the current thinking about like Noble as an app chain moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, this question around like shared security and like kind of Noble's underlying consensus, yes, of course, has been a topic since day one. So I guess like for those that maybe just don't have so much context, I'll briefly share that. So when we initially came up with a design for Noble, around that time, this was back in mid 2022, which wow, feels like forever ago, and in some ways it was. But at that time, of course, shared security was a huge topic within the Cosmos ecosystem, right? And this actually is before like Eigenlayer and, kind of other AVS projects kind of in the Ethereum space. So in many ways, yeah, Cosmos was like a little bit early to this discussion, right? You had interchain security, which was basically like taking the entire Atom validator set and the entire kind of market cap of Atom and using that to secure consumer chains, right? That's what we call them. You also had mesh security also being proposed by like Sunny and the Osmosis team, which was how do you take, partial set security? How do you take partial validator sets across many protocols, combine them into one and have that secure consumer chains versus just like the kind of entire, let's say, Atom validator set. There were a lot of different designs. And of course, Noble was playing within in that discussion because of course we didn't have a chain. We didn't have a validator set. We didn't have a token like for stake. None of that. And then ultimately, honestly, we just felt that it was much safer to go the POA route as like the model and the design around shared security was evolving so quickly. Like there wasn't really consensus around like the optimal shared security model. And yeah, I mean, even now, like interchain security as a concept has sort of faded away. And I mean, even in the Ethereum space around various shared security models, like that's still kind of evolving and very much like in discussion. One kind of project I'll call out that I really enjoyed kind of following in the shared security space is Symbiotic. It kind of reminds me of like the original kind of mesh security vision, which, even though at that time I was working on interchain security, really resonated with me as like just a great like kind of like design and kind of alternative to like a more monolithic shared security system, if you can call it that. And so regardless, we're still seeing that evolve, right? Like in real time, kind of in the Ethereum space. And so like one of my principles is like, don't break it if it's not broken, or don't fix it if it's not broken, right? Like it's not broken, right? Like actually, if anything, the proof of authority validator set works very well, like really, really well. In the worst case scenarios, there is this ability to roll back state if something like really disastrous were to happen. We have super fast upgrades. Like I'm constantly amazed at like how quickly we can upgrade, like 2 seconds, 3 seconds that we've reached kind of like as the best metric of like upgrade times among like 20 validator set distributed around the world. That's impressive, right? From a coordination perspective. And so again, it's fast, 1 second block times. We can also upgrade very quickly. In the worst case scenario, there are things that we can do to, kind of protect our users and make sure that bad actors don't get away with crime if that horrible, kind of situation were to happen. And honestly, it makes asset issuers and kind of RW issuers, I think, also more comfortable with the concept of kind of multi-chain issuance because they know that Noble is a stable, reliable kind of like hub, like in the middle of all these other protocols that facilitates the stablecoin issuance, and they understand that we do have this proof of authority validator set that again is trustworthy. So yeah, I mean, listen, the POA set works well. Again, this is something that we decided to do a couple of years ago because shared security just was not as stable as we would have liked it to be in Cosmos. And then honestly, a couple of years later, I would argue that we made the right choice, right? And so I'm also kind of proud of that. But of course, there is this question of like, okay, well, what's next for Noble from like a, kind of chain architecture perspective? And so I'm actually very happy to kind of share some of these early ideations with you and kind of the community. And there's something that we'll have more information on in the coming weeks. But one thing to note about Noble is obviously, as I said, there's no kind of DeFi right now on Noble, right? Like there's no VM, right? We don't support Cosmos as an example of a VM that we have in Cosmos. Again, our layer 1 chain is very stable. We don't support applications where you would need to do trading, as I said, on the Noble chain. A lot of that takes place on a kind of destination chains like DYDX or Osmosis or Say or other chains. But that all obviously is not limiting, right? Like we do support these stable coins that have a lot of demand, right? We were chatting about like the Euro E kind of before the show started. And a lot of the times we've thought, well, how do we actually build, let's say a stable swap app or a lending app or something that really takes advantage of kind of the native issuance that the Noble L1 already supports. And so one thing that we're in the process of designing is actually an EVM sidechain, actually built on Celestia, that talks to the layer 1. So that talks to the Noble layer 1 kind of proof of authority chain in terms of like sourcing kind of like the actual kind of stable coins and RWAs. But the sidechain can support things like a euro to dollar, swapping app or even a payments app. So yeah, this is the kind of net new thing that we're looking at because again, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Like the POA chain works very well. We've invested a lot of resources into it already. But of course, we understand there's like an entire kind of ecosystem and kind of the need to build applications that are useful and practical and people want, right? Whether like swapping between the euro and the dollar or payments or again, that use stablecoins under the hood. So versus, kind of outsourcing a lot of that labor and a lot of that kind of demand to other places, we realized, well, why don't we just build it ourselves? And what better place to do that than kind of on Celestia as an EVM chain kind of on Celestia. And of course, there's a lot of historical kind of intellectual and philosophical synergies between like Cosmos and Celestia, which I know you know about. And yeah, it's exciting to kind of finally be in this space where, we've done such a good job of like the pure kind of like issuance model across this like highly, highly fragmented ecosystem of many, many chains, many protocols that all want native stables. Kind of from going from that to this, what we're calling the Noble app layer, where you can, start building these applications, that are useful to people. So yeah, I want you to be able to swap your dollars to euros or vice versa and kind of, in one click, be able to withdraw that to your, bank account in the case of Euro E, like on a Noble app layer. And hopefully that, that's something that we'll be working towards.
Very cool. I'm looking forward to that. Like, yeah, I find like I'm a obviously like user of USDC on Cosmos. I'm also a user of Euro E. Big fan of Monerium. I use that app. Like we use it for business, also for personal. And you guys also issue the Euro E in Cosmos, which means that given the problem is the liquidity, right?
Yes.
That's the problem that I often run into. If you try to swap anything more than 10K, whether it's on, I know you guys don't issue the Ethereum version of Euro E, but whether it's on Ethereum or on Osmosis, there's just like no liquidity.
Yes. Yes.
And that's an issue, right? If this scales, how do you think about like scaling that, right? Because I mean, it's a stable swap to some extent. I mean, two stables with two different prices, right? So I don't know if can you call it a stable swap even if it's like swapping two different currencies?
Yeah, a good question. I mean, we are there's like the category stable swaps, and there's like different kind of algorithms or kind of mechanisms that supports different types of stable swaps. So yeah, when it comes to like dollars and dollar like assets, that's typically the kind of AMM.
I mean, like dollars and euros
Yeah,
is not a
so
stable. Yeah,
that's a
that's not a
second.
stable.
And that,
Okay.
yeah, so that we're looking at designing something more similar to concentrated liquidity pool, where you're always going to have like the perfect price for that conversion. So let's say, yeah, euro to dollar, and you can sort of incentivize market makers on either side and liquidity providers, kind of with like ticks within a certain range of that perfect price. And yeah, I mean, this is something that, you're seeing the euro as a stable coin take off kind of elsewhere, like on base, for example, but really it's not really prominent yet, even despite the fact that the euro as like a currency in the regular FX market is the second most traded currency in the world, right? USD being number one, euro being number two, and I think that the yen is number three, if I'm not mistaken. And so,
You guys do all three.
yeah, well, the yen actually technically isn't live, but yeah, we're hoping to support it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we're just really trying to create like very familiar user experiences that you would have with a Wise or a Revolut or, in Canada with like an Interact e-transfer, although that is like so bad. Like, that's all I know.
Interact e-transfer is pretty good, actually. Like,
Yeah, okay. I mean,
I don't think people should fund Interact e-transfer. It's like you could just send an email and people get money in their bank account. It's actually pretty
that's
pretty
true.
cool.
That's true. That's true. I guess it's kind of like,
Quirky things that only Canadians know about.
that's true. That's true. It's just a bit of a monopoly, and it's like very permissioned. And anyways, you're
Yeah.
right. Like, it's not the worst UX, but
I
point
mean, it'd
being,
be cool if you guys built like basically Noble to Interact e-transfer. That would be pretty dope.
well, it's funny you say that because I mean, like, there is a workflow that we've been like discussing on building, which is like similar with Monerium, right? Because Monerium does already have like the licenses and like the ability for you to withdraw to your bank account, right? Like,
In Europe, yeah.
in Europe, right? For like like that market. But yeah, like that kind of premise of like an Interact e-transfer type product, but of course with stables, yeah, I mean, that'd be really cool. In any case, like as you said, like liquidity is low, right, for the euro, right? Like it's bad pricing, right? Like as you said, more than 10,000. I actually thought that's hot. That seems high. Like I would think it's even less. That like the pricing gets kind of bad. But that's just because there's no like protocols that really are just going all in on like stablecoin infrastructure, and even to a greater degree around like RWAs when it comes to things like bonds as well, which of course we support. So yeah, I mean, again, we're just trying to figure out like let's take like destiny into our own hands, and let's with all the experience that we have around multi-chain issuance of stables and kind of routing and these like complex kind of workflows under the hood, like how do we expand that to an app layer, right? Where now it's not just like, you, let's say, using, the euro on like an osmosis pool, but you actually being able to like swap for that, like, on Noble with better pricing and things like this. So yeah, that's really the vision, at a basic level there. And again, it's just always a pleasure to work with teams that we really respect and have been around for a very long time and are smart people. So
Yeah.
and that's very much the Celestia team. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's talk about this USDN thing.
Yes.
I was actually kind of surprised when I saw that. So why are you guys launching your own stablecoin?
It's a great question. All right. So a few things. It's a fundamentally different, call it like model, right? For like a stable coin. And I'll also just quickly take it back to like our driving motivations, which is working with really great teams. M0, like through and through, like fits that description, right? So just for those that are kind of like not in the know, M0 is it's a project built on Ethereum, which effectively takes a lot of the kind of amazing like elements of Circle's model and MakerDAO's model and kind of like puts it together and is like, hey, this is like a new way to issue a stablecoin, and the building blocks for kind of that issuance framework are all on ETH. And let me just now kind of go into details of what it is. So M0, they have this stablecoin called so M, just like USDC or Tether, is always pegged to kind of $1. And similar to those stablecoins, M is collateralized by treasury bills. It's actually over collateralized by, I think, 106%. And you can actually see all of that collateralization on chain. There's attestations via a validator network that kind of attest to those reserves that are, of course, held off chain every, I think, 24 hours. And so there's M, it's collateralized by T-bills, and it's over collateralized, and all of that is sort of transparently kind of available. But the cool thing about M is they are creating almost like, in some ways, like a hub and spoke model where they partner with distribution partners like Noble, and they say, take this M. It's like this kind of like basic building block, always equal to $1, but because we're collateralizing it with yield-bearing instruments like T-bills, you can actually decide how to pass on that yield as a distribution partner to your kind of network of applications, users, etc. Noble will be the first distributor of this M token. Taking it, we're calling it the Noble Dollar, and we're saying, hey, it earns yield. This yield, depending on who supports the Noble Dollar, can be redirected and kind of controlled programmatically to a variety of destinations. So let's say you are a DEX kind of, that supports Noble. You say, hey, we want to support the Noble Dollar. And for our purposes, we're actually going to redirect the yield, 4.3%, to liquidity pools for incentives or to subsidize fees. Or maybe you say, actually, we're maybe a more general purpose chain, a general purpose L1 with a variety of DeFi applications. We have a token, and we're going to take this Noble Dollar and we're going to take the yield that is generated from the kind of distribution of this Noble Dollar, and we're going to do a buy and burn over a native token, which of course, is like positive for the supply and the distribution of a native token in terms of like price action. And so this is really interesting, right? Like, one, it's a yield-bearing stablecoin, which we're seeing has a lot of demand in general, because of course people like yield. And that's normal. But there's this like other element, which is it's fundamentally programmable, right? Like this, or in our case, the Noble Dollar, you can fundamentally decide where to redirect the yield kind of on chain in this like programmatic, like transparent way. And so we're calling Noble Dollar a composable yield stablecoin because the yield is composable in a way that is not doable kind of with other kind of stablecoin models. And we're really excited to kind of do that, right? So again, like as a primitive, it is this very stable, very, kind of legitimate kind of asset, because you can see where the collateral lives. There's this entire network of kind of minters and banks that kind of have signed up onto the system. But of course, it's highly, highly DeFi native, right? Because you can have this composable yield element in the equation where both Noble as a distribution partner of M0, but other protocols, other app developers can say, hey, we're going to redirect the yield in like this very specific way, because that's just how, that's just where the demand is, like in this moment in time. And so, yeah, we're really excited to be the first distribution partner of M0. Again, it is a novel kind of stablecoin issuance model, right? That's very, very different than what you typically see in the market with the likes of course, like Tether and others. But yeah, we think there's a lot of opportunity, and yeah, we're super excited to be working on this.
Cool. So M0, I'd love to get them on actually, need to kind of dive in deeper into what they're building. But so they issue this kind of like dollar equivalent asset that is generating yield through the T-bills that it's backed from, or whatever RWAs it's backed from. And then you get to issue your own, I guess, call it white label stablecoin using this infrastructure. And they say, hey, like, we're going to take part of this yield, but then you go do whatever you want with the rest of the yield.
Yeah.
Is that
basically
sort of, yeah.
Basically. And actually, the kind of even more interesting thing is, like, Noble as a distribution partner can actually become a distributor to other protocols, kind of like downstream, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, really, like, if Noble Dollar works, it means like M works. And if M works, it means Noble Dollar works, because also one thing I didn't mention is that M is fungible with Noble Dollar. Noble Dollar is fungible with like another white labeled version of M, right? In the same way that USDC is fungible, like on ETH is fungible with USDC on Noble. So you have
Yeah.
this like network of distribution partners that just have a lot more, alignment when it comes to the upside of the kind of TVL of that token going up, because of course there is the yield component that like typically is not shared with partners. And so
Yeah.
for us, we think it's, just takes a lot of like amazing kind of fundamental first principles of like a lot of the stables that like work, which is like people want dollars. There's like a revenue or like a business profitability case when you can, of course, collateralize those dollars with yield bearing assets, like real world assets, of course, as you said. And then thirdly, there is the on-chain distribution piece that's really important, right? To get like liquidity and kind of users and mind share of these stable coins. And so if you can like make these stables like work very well on chain, be super DeFi native, but also have a yield bearing component, and then of course like from a fungibility kind of like UX perspective also work, then I think there's something that's like really powerful there. But yeah, again, we're just grateful to be kind of the first distribution partner for this asset, and yeah, hopefully intend to prove that the model is a good model.
So when does this go live?
So we're rolling it out in phases. So the number one phase is like USDN on Noble. So you'll be able to actually kind of swap into Noble Dollar with USDC. That goes live, bearing any like delays of engineering timelines, March 5th. And then, so yeah, that's really exciting. And then the second phase, which is super, super important, is again having USDN available over IBC to the rest of the ecosystem as well. But that takes a little bit more engineering effort because, of course, you need to develop, things like rebasing and make sure that that entire kind of system works well and is safe and secure. So
Yeah.
those are the two phases, and we're looking at the kind of rebasing version of USDN to go live a couple of months after the initial launch, which is March 5th.
Okay. And are there any plans for like a Noble token that is not a stable coin? Like, is that still being discussed?
Yeah, so still being discussed. Nothing like I can obviously share right now, but definitely something that we're like interested in. And like Seb, like just kind of take a step backwards, right? Like we all want like to see protocols that like have real users and like generate meaningful revenue and like have like good products like succeed, right? Like I think Hyperliquid's like a great example. Like they have like a product that like people use and they make revenue and like it's like a good user experience and it works and people use it. And that's what we want Noble to be, right? Like we want like things that we build for people to use to be like valuable. And I think like if that happens, then like, yes, like there, likely will be a token, but we don't want to ever launch a token before we've like achieved some like level of usability and like traction and real world adoption, which is like what we're all
Before token. It's
yeah,
a great philosophy.
I know it's like a little of a paradigm shift, but I wish, to be honest, more teams had that in mind. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
our philosophy exactly.
I mean, honestly, I think it's such a good flex if you can do that. Another team that you probably were familiar with that are also doing a very interesting kind of validator set and POA network is Dango, Larry's project. And I don't know, you're familiar with that, but
I'll look into
basically he's building a proof of authority network, and the way that validators would get remunerated is they're just going to invoice them. Like,
yeah.
they're just going to invoice the company, and the company will pay the validators to run the network, and then the network will be generating revenue from fees. So it's just like cutting out all of this complexity, this kind of tokenomics complexity and issuance and like, right.
Yeah.
Just invoice, just have the validators invoice you and pay you for the infra.
And yeah, and as we all know, like typically how validators got compensated, of course, was like through commissions on like inflationary like tokens that were like staked with those validators. And we've also seen the challenges around those like models as well. And like, hey, I like yield too, but what about real yield? Well, what about like, real world asset yield, like T-bill yield? So that's kind of like what we're also trying to do. Like, let's make sure there is like some like positive flywheel effect, like kind of pushed with the things that we build when it comes to like getting like developers onboarded and like getting, kind of a community of kind of loyal users. But that yield should probably come from real world yield. And guess what?
Yeah.
That already exists in the real world. So why not just bring that on chain? So yeah, that's like another nuanced thing, right? Like I like that the validators can just invoice a company, get paid for their services. It makes a lot of sense. It's a lot more durable. It's a lot more sustainable and predictable, right? Like you shouldn't have to check the price action of the native token to like be like, am I going to cover my costs this month? Right?
Yeah.
Like that's not sustainable.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to connect you guys
Yeah,
in order
please.
to have native USDC on also on Dango because I know that they're counting on having fees paid in USD. So before we wrap up, I do want to take a step back and just like talk about Cosmos a little bit here. So a couple of months ago in December, I had Magmar and Josh from the ICF and ICL on the podcast, and we went into this, skip acquisition, and the whole ecosystem has been like, I think, kind of fairly bullish on this news and on this development. Like unclear if tangibly like if that has moved the needle yet. It's still quite early,
Yeah.
but I'm curious like what you think about this shift, and if you guys have in your dealings with the hub folks and just other teams in the ecosystem, like what is your sense from other founders in this space on like, does this really sort of help Cosmos come out and particularly the hub come out
Yeah.
of this? I want like, it's not an intellectual rut, right? It's more of like a product and like usage rut, right? Like people, I think intellectually think the Cosmos is great, and even people outside of Cosmos, but there's just been a real long bear market in Cosmos,
Yeah.
and we're not out of that yet. So yeah,
No.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So listen, it's always been about coordination and about getting teams to kind of work together on building out like these core kind of Cosmos primitives like IBC, maintenance around things like CosmWasm. I mentioned earlier, like we're not going to be supporting CosmWasm on the Noble layer one because there just hasn't been maintenance of it that we would have liked to see for us to feel like comfortable that this is like a stable piece of software that we can like entrust our users with like their, real funds. And so, of course, like having a, kind of centralized team like Skip taking on some of those responsibilities around core development and maintenance is great. I think what remains to be seen is like how much of that is like directed by like the sole objective of like Atom succeeding versus just like doing it as like a public good and maintaining these core primitives again, because they're just really useful and powerful for like many teams to kind of use and, bootstrap a Cosmos L1 and, decide to, of course, build an app chain kind of on the Cosmos stack. And I think like there sometimes is a tension perhaps around, of course, focusing on like adding the token versus like focusing on like just like the public goods kind of with need attention and love and care and resources like as a whole. And I'm just like curious to see like how that evolves, right? Like as I said earlier, as we were chatting about like IBC, right? Like there are multiple teams at this point, like getting venture funding and like trying to take these like primitives to market, maybe even quicker, right? Than like what let's say the foundation can do. And I think that's normal, right? Like I think that's like a normal kind of healthy thing because it just one like shows you how powerful IBC is, but two like shows you that like on the one hand we do have this like very competent, very professional teams kind of taking control finally and like trying to coordinate the ecosystem. But on the other hand, there will always exist like a much larger ecosystem of like development teams that are, for one reason or another kind of building their app or their, layer one or whatever on the Cosmos stack. And so I guess like my like comment is like ultimately very, very bullish. I'm like positive that there's again like a team doing this, playing this role of like a coordinator. But of course, like let's make sure that's like public goods driven, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, like Atom is like an important token. It's like funded a lot of the development that we like have right now, but it's also not the only like token. It's not the only layer one that exists in Cosmos. And so there is a much larger, kind of ecosystem of projects that would love to build on Cosmos if there was a stable VM that was like audited regularly and that, was secure, like Cosmos wasn't. Or there are a lot of teams that want to build on Cosmos, assuming that IBC, to EVM works. All of these like decision-making processes that like founders or engineering teams like make, I hope that like those can be well, like honored, let's say, by this new, by this team, which is the Skip team. So yeah, again, we work very, very closely with them. We're going to continue to work closely with them on like a lot of the core development because of course Noble, depends on a lot of this core development to kind of, continue existing and building. Ultimately very positive.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm also very, very, think very positively and very highly of that team. And I think if there's one team that has the experience, the alignment, and also is very product driven, execution driven, I think it's the Skip team. So I've been very happy to be fortunate to be able to chat with them like a few times in the last few months and just sort of seeing the direction that things are going. And I think it's positive. I think if one thing, it seems to have reeled in some of the chains that had kind of distanced themselves from Cosmos. There appears to be a desire to maybe realign with Atom or get closer to the hub, and I think that's good for the hub and it's good for Atom. And the other thing that is worth being said is that Atom is very distributed. It has a broad distribution of token holders, which includes many funds, family offices, high net worths, right? So there are bag holders that are holding like very large amounts of Atom, and it's also pretty well integrated across centralized exchanges and on-ramps.
Yeah.
So it has that foundation, I think, that it can continue to do well if it is well stewarded.
Yep.
By the Skip team and the ICF. So cool. Well, Jelena, thank you so much for coming on. Let's not wait a year to do this again.
Yeah, please.
And we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me, as always. Thanks for the chat.
Cheers.